This video was recorded at the Everyday Economy Research event in June 2021. It's the last of 6 videos in that mini-series, and it talks about research with communities when researching the future. This time I'm going to talk about a project involving civil society, which I did with Bartlett colleagues Hyunji and Elisabetta. Hyunji is here in the room. And I'm not sure about Elisabetta, but she is with us in spirit. And we used focus group methods. This project was part of a series of research activities for the UK2070 Commission, and it's where I started to make connections with John Tomini's work. And it's an organisation, the UK2070 Commission, that looks at spatial inequalities across the country and how to make a better future. Part of the problem they're looking at is addressing the lack of spatial planning. So you can imagine how we got involved at the Bartlett School of Planning. And of course, there's no comprehensive plan in England, which is the elephant in the room. And there's no long-term thinking, and both of those things don't really help in the search for a more equal country. The work we did was funded by the Bartlett. So just thinking about that problem of the imbalance, a spatial imbalance in the country, and thinking about how places are, and we hate the word, but left behind economically. And on the slide, you can see the sort of metrics, the traditional data, the traditional type of research we do to pull those facts out, and they're really important. I can share the link later. But the story is about North-South divide, for example, but also intra-regional differences as well. So differences of communities. Then the second point is that places are not just left behind or overlooked in economic terms, but also procedurally, which Sarah's touched on as well there. So that's to say, in the bigger picture that the UK2070 Commission was looking at, there's a historic centralised decision-making tradition here in the UK, and this fuels the problem, makes communities feel remote from decisions and understandably mistrusting of government or governance, and it touches on again what Sarah was saying about institutions, part of this story. So the focus group work, the focus group project was trying to add another dimension to this work on inequalities. And clearly the proof in statistical terms is an important starting point, but the unit of analysis there is very abstracted. It doesn't explain why things happen or how they affect people. So, in the topic of the day, we're thinking about inequality as something that affects people. You could use the metaphor of a disease, but basically then we want to understand symptoms. And so for that reason, in the same way the doctor needs to speak to the patient, we need to hear directly, otherwise we don't really understand it properly. As researchers, this is really challenging. How do we hear from places, and how do we engage people in this inquiry about the future, which doesn't exist, and how to ask communities about that in a meaningful way. So again, particularly because we're a small team, how do we really cover the ground properly? So what we thought we'd do was talk to people who would know better about places, local community organisations, civil society, who are clearly closer to communities. They know the field, they have a good sense of the local context, the development context and history. And we anticipated that they would also be working on the problem, so tackling the same issue, but from a different angle. So for that reason, our work was all about bringing civil society actors together in the research and talking to them about local level realities, sort of zooming in, as it were, recognizing that the fact that they have these existing stakeholder networks, like May was talking about, that exist already, and how do we connect to that. And also, interestingly, these are people who are there for the long term. These are organizations that see themselves there in the future, self-starting actions like the small businesses and so on, but having community-driven actions that they are involved in and know about, that we can learn from them. So we held 5 events across the country, And in the focus groups, what we wanted to do was to talk to people, deliberate. That's part of the action of spatial planning, is deliberating and thinking about the future. Talking about what the priorities were, how they thought places might need to change and so on, or stay the same. And what they wanted from strategies and what might be useful from their perspective. So obviously we were looking for lessons for spatial strategy, working to the UK2070 Commission and these big national pictures. But what we were getting a sense of was types of priorities, and actually caricature this as a type of people telling us a sort of slow apocalypse that they saw coming, with things like piecemeal urbanism, unconnected parts of towns, and degradation of ecologies, slowly, little bits being taken away. This sort of sense of loss that John and Florence were talking about. Also, we were learning about types of barriers to actions, things like growing levels of social anxiety amongst young people and loss of funding streams for particular projects. We also learned about the types of work that the civil society organisations were doing locally, for example, using tools like Building for Life, or coordinating networks to help food banks and food sharing at the time. And we also learned what they wanted from strategy and what they didn't want from strategy in some. So, for example, policies that could help with the social infrastructure of the type that we've been hearing about today, but also how to connect different areas, rural and urban places that might share a school, for example. So finally, just very briefly on some of the challenges. Inevitably, what we were doing was building this bigger national picture. So the work was quite one remove from places. We needed to go further, even though we got some really interesting fine-grained insights. We didn't really get a sense of the place comprehensively. And also, we're very aware that we're working with organisations who are telling us how much pressure they're under and how much the problems are growing for them. And then particularly, you can think about during the current pandemic, this has increased the pressure on them, something that Hyunjin Elizabeth and I have written about as well. So we're aware that we're doing this and we want to connect with communities, but we're asking for their precious time and we don't want to put pressure on people. So really, finally, I want to sort of think about this challenge of, when we can't be there, online is great and so on, but when we make initial connections, what is the researcher's role in doing this initiation? Should we be approaching people, and how? These are sorts of things that we're asking ourselves. For more videos from the Everyday Economy Research Team, you can like and subscribe to our YouTube channel or visit our website.